Hello, welcome to Breakfast All Day. Christy and Alonso and Matt, we are all in our respective little cubbies talking to each other and to you. We have a great little documentary for you to see and talk about. It's called Crip Camp. It's not about Crips and Bloods, and Alonso is going to tell you about it. Alonso.
So yeah, this is a movie that premiered at Sundance this year and is now streaming on Netflix, so everybody can be watching it. It is co-directed by Jim Lebrecht and Nicole Newnham. Jim Lebrecht is also sort of our narrator, and he's kind of one of the key figures in this documentary. Taking us back to the late 1960s, there was a summer camp called Camp Jened. It was just up the road from Woodstock. That was for disabled teenagers. And so a lot of the people who went there, think back on it very fondly. It was one of their first opportunities to be sort of like autonomous and away from their parents and, have a certain degree of agency. And there's a ton of footage from the camp because there was a group called the People's Video Project with the sort of very earliest kind of handheld reel-to-reel video cameras taking footage. And that alone would be an interesting enough story, but it turns out that that camp wound up being the breeding ground for an entire generation of activists who would totally change the way this country deals with disabled people, particularly the passage of the Americans with Disability Act and the enforcement of its rules in terms of making schools, public buildings, apartment buildings, all these different public facilities accessible to people in wheelchairs. And the film kind of climaxes in a weeks-long sit-in at the San Francisco HEW office to get the Carter administration to enforce the bill and to make these changes, no matter how expensive they were going to be. And it's incredibly empowering documentary, moving and funny, and a story that I frankly didn't know. So I really enjoyed getting to learn about it.
I did too, and I think on paper, the idea of it sounds like an eat your vegetables kind of thing, right?
Sure.
Here's a topic that, oh gosh, okay, I'm not, and there is an acknowledgement even too of how a lot of the counselors at first felt like, I don't know how to deal with these people. I'm here to help. I'm here for a summer job, but this is daunting, and I don't want to do the wrong thing. And you realize very quickly, getting to know all of them, that like they're totally profane and horny. It's like
there's a crabs breakout at the camp.
Right. It's like meatballs. I mean, like they're all out like making out in the corners and smoking and cursing.
And the crabs outbreak. Like that is so fucking funny. Right. That's hilarious. The one guy who we get to see the video of his striptease act.
To sweet transvestite.
I wanted a whole documentary about that guy.
Yeah, no, this movie is so wonderful at like forcing the humanizing of these folks that so easily are overlooked, right? And gives you a sense of like, oh, that's what it was like back then, right? And they talk about the Willowbrook expose that is awful. It's probably the one saving grace to what's his name? Rivera's career, right? Like, I mean, he did some other stuff, but
Al Capone's vault.
He was a serious journalist at one point in time.
Right. Yeah, this, and then it tilts into this activism that some of it, like, and you definitely get the sense of how empowering it was, how much it meant for all these kids to basically hang out together every summer. And then one of the fascinating things was, as one of the people later says around the time of the sit-in, she learned that because of the way Camp Jened worked, where it was basically like, you got a disability, you're in. Like, we kind of don't care what it is, right? That's the way they approached the sit-in. And it was really like, what do you got, right?
Yeah,
like,
you have like they talk about in the film, there's a sort of hierarchy where, like, there's the on top is the polios, because they still look relatively normal and present in a non-disabled kind of way, except for the wheelchair part. And then you have your like cerebral palsy and
the CPs,
spina bifida, and like all that.
Right.
And so by the time they get to the HEW thing, you've got all these different people with various different disabilities, along with like there's a blind guy who's one of the major spokesmen.
Right, and deaf people, and yeah.
And
I love the couple in Oakland with cerebral palsy.
Yes.
At the camp are fucking hilarious and just profane and just raunchy and so deeply, sweetly in love with each other, but say like unexpectedly shocking things.
And her story about like I had my completely healthy appendix taken out because my doctor just assumed there was no way that I could just have a venereal disease. What she actually had. She had an STD at the time. Because they're just this assumption of like, oh, well, these people don't fuck, but of course they do,
Right. I mean, she talks about her affair with the bus driver.
Yeah.
Right.
And the incident with the doctor prompts her to then go back and get her master's in human sexuality.
Exactly.
Right. And then her husband tells that story about when he was at camp, like, it was his first experience with someone grabbing his cock. Like, right? Like one of the counselors taught him how to make out, and then somebody grabbed his cock, and it was awesome. And
this movie was produced by, I want to give a shout out to Howard Gertler because he's a really good doc producer. He did How to Survive a Plague, which was my favorite film of 2011. That came out. And this one, I think, works in a lot of the same way in terms of, it's a story that is obviously very, I'm sure. It's weird though, on Who Shot You this week, we had Kristen Lopez on, who is a film critic who uses a wheelchair, and she didn't know any of this either.
Wow.
But I'm not surprised because like when we show a movie like How to Survive a Plague at Outfest, there was invariably in the Q&A some like 22-year-old will stand up and be like, I never heard any of this.
Wow.
Well, like we had that moment when we talked about that with that Oklahoma riot when we started watching Watchmen, right?
Good example. Yeah.
I mean, there's all these pieces of history that you're like,
really?
Fuck?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I love I love that I know this.
And somewhere Howard Zinn's like,
exactly. But this movie, I love how it celebrates this idea of what activism can accomplish. I mean, if we're going to try and put it in the filter of right now, of what's happening right now, it's this reminder that like, the government is capable of doing such good stuff for people. But if you are people who are not like white, able-bodied, heterosexual Christian, cisgendered, rich men, you got to grab the government by the ankles and just shake them and shake them and shake them and shake them, or you're never going to get anything out of them. And that's what these folks had to do and did, and made a huge difference for themselves and for, generations to follow them. And so it's like, yes, it turns out we do have trillions of dollars that are just sitting around when like Wall Street needs a bailout or whatever. So like, don't give me this bullshit about how we can't afford to provide like food and housing and, healthcare for every American. And so stories like this remind you that, yeah, that stuff's out there and you can get it, but damn, they make you work for it.
Also, I should mention, because there's so much archival footage, it's really cool to see, like, as you mentioned, the seeds of what they were like then and who they would become. And that's a great example of that is Judy, I want to say her last name is a human.
Yeah.
And you see early on, like when they're trying to figure out what they should have for dinner, she's
already an organizer.
She is the leader, listening to everyone's voices and trying to make consensus. And she becomes a major leading force in organizing folks and arranging this sit-in, for example, and she's still doing it, and so it's really cool to see that has been there for decades, and it was fostered at a place like this.
And I love one of the things that when they talk about the sit-in, that every meeting they had, she made sure that there was a sign interpreter there.
Yeah.
Right. And even just then, right, like making sure that there's a sign interpreter because there's that portion of the group that needed that, and she didn't even like she almost didn't even have to think about it, right? It was just like, oh, and we need this, right? I thought this was a really great doc because it really, apart from maybe like the presentation of the Rivera footage, like it never really shows these folks as victims.
No.
Right? It shows them as just like, we've had it tough and we were fighting to just be people.
They are the stars of their own movie, literally.
The Capitol crawl was really
heartbreaking,
right?
Yeah.
It was
really
like
powerful,
right? It's like, oh, here's how uneven it is. We want to go to the Capitol, we got to climb up the fucking steps. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Like, and if you want to look a portrait of like how communities can support each other, all the stuff where the Black Panthers show up at the sit-in to bring breakfast every day, it's
right?
Like, because they get it. Like you guys are fighting this corrupt system. You guys are trying to make positive change, and we're here for that.
Or like we went to Washington and the local machinists union sent a truck. Like, yeah, we'll drive you guys around. Right. And then we were, we talked about this a little bit in our opening segment about like the happenstance things that happen that then allow for something. The technicians union had gone on strike in Washington, right? Which is why
right.
picked up that San Francisco
footage.
But I love that San Francisco reporter they're talking to. He's like, yeah, these guys are rabble rousers. I loved them. Right? Like if that's not a early 70s San Francisco newsman attitude, I don't know what is like. These guys are troublemakers. That's what I always want to see.
We should mention also, besides our friend Howard Gertler, among the producers are Barack and Michelle Obama. I think this is part of their Netflix deal, right?
I believe so, yes.
Must be, yeah. Anyway, it's really good. So it's on Netflix. You can watch it now at home.
And you should. It will make you feel better.
It's very enlightening. I'm saying 8.7, and part of that just because some of the music selections are a little on the nose. Like it begins with For What It's Worth, which is like maybe the most overused song of like any kind of Vietnam era, Woodstock era film ever. So there's something happening here. Really?
Fair enough.
That's my one little complaint. 8.7 from me.
Yeah, what did I say? 8.5?
8.5 you said, Matt.
Yeah, 8.5. Like it could stay a little more tightly focused, but it's still really good.
Okay. Alonso?
This is, I think, my first 10 of 2020.
Woo-woo! Go big.
I love this movie. It had me, like, from the opening credits, I was just in its thrall. And, I laughed and I cried. What can I say?
There you go. Okay, our number's a 9.1, so check it out on Netflix.
Absolutely. Thanks for watching. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel here on YouTube. You can follow us at BeFastAllDay on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/BeFastAllDay. Lots of fun exclusive stuff for our subscribers, including we're wrapping up our recap of Netflix's Tiger King, and also talking about HBO's Westworld and The Plot Against America and other cool stuff as well. So do check that out. Thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time. Bye.